was at the Prop8 trial in San Francisco on Wednesday. Very, very interesting day. I got there at 7:30 to line up to be available to get in if there were seats available, and there were actually plenty of seats available. I waited in line for an hour, but I didn't have to. But I sat right in the second row next to Cleve Jones, who is featured in the Harvey Milk movie, who was the aide to Harvey Milk. And he'd been there the previous 2 days, so he gave me a little background. But it was really interesting because all the major players were there. David Boies, Charles Cooper for the other side, and of course Ted Olson, and probably about 30 attorneys sitting there, and then another 10 or so law clerks sitting in what would normally be the jury box. And the witness was this Professor Chauncey, who's a Yale professor in history and an expert in history, and he's the expert witness brought on by the plaintiffs. He was being cross-examined, and then he was being interviewed or questioned by Theresa Stewart, who was with the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, and it was the most incredible experience to be in that room as a part of history. Chris was great and gave me a camera to document the trial. I interviewed 4 people. First time in my life I've ever been a reporter, so take a look, see what you think. We're here with Stuart Milk, nephew of Harvey Milk, who's going to talk about yesterday's testimony and how it applies to today.
Well, I'm going to take yesterday's and go a little bit further back to 1978, and my uncle was actually articulating many of the same arguments that we're hearing here today in today's testimony and yesterday's testimony, which is that when you brand a product or a message that diminishes a group of people, it's normally a distorted message, or it's almost exclusively a distorted message, and that message is based on fear. And fear always moves people in a bad direction. And that was Harvey's message 30 years ago, because that's what he saw was being packaged. And I think what you heard in the court yesterday and today is so much of that concerted effort to package fear and to bring fear into the realm of people's moving forward with full equality. And so fear has always been as Harvey would say, fear has always moved us in a direction away from freedom, away from the promise of a true democracy.
Let me ask you, what's it like being up in the city where your uncle served and became famous, and his life was taken 30 years later with all this going on here?
I think it's amazing. I'm wearing Harvey's class ring from, he was born in 1940. He was graduated in 1947. San Francisco is normally one of the epicenters, and so I think it's kind of nice that this is full circle, that we're doing this here in San Francisco. The sad thing is that 30 years have passed. At this year's candlelight vigil a few months ago, which was the 31st anniversary of Harvey's assassination, there was a family there with a sign that said, "Dan White is our hero," and of course Dan White assassinated Harvey. So we still have, unfortunately, this very strong fear-based element that is that actually demonizes any community that struggles for equality. And so we really, I think, in any constitutional democracy, need to look for the court to send a very strong message that this type of inequality does not stand.
My name is Theresa Stewart, Chief Deputy City Attorney for the City and County of San Francisco. We got involved in the case, the Perry case, because we had been long involved in the issue of marriage equality from the state case that preceded it. And when this case was filed, we wanted to sort of be of whatever assistance we could to help get it off the ground and get it going. So I think we actually got a call from the lawyers representing AFER and the plaintiffs in the case, and I just sort of said, how can we help? What can we do? And eventually we made a motion to intervene, which the court granted on the theory that we brought a perspective about why discrimination costs the government and the taxpayers in a lot of ways, and why it's not in the interest of government to discriminate. And that wasn't anything that the Attorney General or Arnold Schwarzenegger and his lawyers were willing to speak to, nor were the county officials who'd been sued in the case. So because we were willing to step up and really talk about that and put on that part of the case, the court let us join the team. But I have to say the legal team has really invited us to join in every aspect of the case, and we have willingly and happily done so. So it's been a real privilege and very important work that we are not just pleased to be able to help with.
And just personally, what's it like to be involved in this historic case?
Well, it's a once momentous and exciting, but for me it personally actually brings up sadness too, I have to say, in that not to be involved or to get to do this, I'm learning so much from like David Boies and Ted Olson. But when I work with I've done sort of two big issues, the history of discrimination with Professor Chauncey, and also worked on the deposition of Ron Prentice, the head of Yes on 8. And when you review all the kind of anti-gay history and the anti-gay messaging and stuff that was circulated, you know, I always think I'm going to get past feeling sad about it, but I have these moments where this huge wave of grief comes over me, and yet I wouldn't not work on it for the world, even with that. I mean, it's just one of those things you want to change things, and in order to change things, you have to be able to bear the sad part. So it's a pleasure, it's an honor, and you know, maybe the fifth or sixth time I work on this issue, I won't feel that way anymore.
I'm Adam Hahn. I've been here at the Prop 8 federal trial today, this morning. It's been really interesting, and I feel privileged and excited to see this really important civil rights case kind of, at least the early stages of it, play out. The cross-examination was interesting, and I'm looking forward to more of it in the afternoon.
And what did you think of the witness, the history professor from Yale?
I think he did a very good job handling the defense attorney's questions. I think he's very knowledgeable. Of course, he was kind of limited in what he was able to say because it's a kind of different context. I'm kind of interested in the legal aspects of this, if they're going to, you know, I'm kind of interested in what the closing arguments are going to be like. What if they're going to rule that sexual orientation is protected under federal law? Obviously, that's what a lot of people here are wanting to find out. But it's also really interesting seeing testimony that will lead them to that decision.
I think today went very well. I think that we demonstrated again that there is no justification for the ban on gay and lesbian marriage. There's much harm that ban does to gay and lesbian couples. There's much harm that ban does to the children of gay and lesbian couples. And the defendant's experts have admitted that. And there is simply no justification, no positive benefit. There's certainly no damage to heterosexual marriages resulting from permitting gay people to marry.
I was subpoenaed by the very people who are the defendants in this Prop 8 case. They want all my records. My case will be heard this summer and in Sacramento, and we'll see what happens. What's next? Well, we are going to fight for full equal rights in this country for all gay and lesbian Americans. That's what we're going to do.